Good morning. We concluded Hemshech Hayim Beis, meaning as much as the Rebbe Rashab wrote, we know he did not finish it. So we're learning the supplemental material to help us understand both what he did write, the Rebbe Rashab, at the end of the Hemshech, as well as what he might have continued with, piecing that it's all based on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Magbil L'Sheves, Chanukah Maimer in Torah Ur, Miketz, and its explanation, and the Mitzvah Rebbe's elaboration, which is what we're in the middle of now. And it's very clear that the Rebbe Rashab, you could see, actually quotes entire sections from this Maimer. You could see that the Hemshech Hayim Beis was following along this Maimer with the Rebbe Rashab's elaboration. So we're in the middle of page 392 on the Maimori AdHamtz Bereishis, and the pages can be found at AdHamtz.com. So let's sum up what we learned, and then we'll continue. We learned the following. We're learning about, after explaining Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, what a neshama is about, the power of a soul, a divine soul, as it comes down into this world, it's empowered with its divine energy to not just express its love to God and its connection to God, but also to influence the material world itself, starting with the animal soul, the body and the animal soul, that the animal soul should also be to love God with both sides of the heart, the right and the left, including the animal soul. And how does it do it? As we learn through Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the prayers that precede that, then the Shema, that go through the different levels of yichud, of appreciating how all of existence is really all part of a divine higher reality, all united with that higher reality, and actually all only an expression of that higher reality. The lower level of yichud, the higher level of yichud, yichud tatoy, yichud ilo, das tachton, das elyon, two levels of ayin, and both are united by through HaAtzmus. They're both united, and that also impacts the animal soul, which can appreciate and understand these ideas. But then we have another pasuk, that the neshama comes armed with mitzvahs and Torah, ner mitzvah v'Torah, and here too we use the word ner. So we're in the middle of explaining what does the ner mitzvah add, and how and why is a mitzvah called a ner, just like a neshama is called a ner. That's what we're in the middle of. And this is gonna lead us into understanding how mitzvahs and Torah help the neshama achieve its goal. We'll get to that. We already touched upon it, but he's in the middle of discussion. So right now we're still talking about why is a mitzvah called a ner? Because a mitzvah too comes down into Gashmi. It's just like the soul comes down into this material world, and that's why the soul is like the wick that is inserted within the oil, which is represents the animal soul, its intelligence, human intelligence, and that creates together the soul. The divine soul affects the oil to be fuel for divine love, the hafta. That's the flame. So to a mitzvah comes into Gashmis. So the Gashmis is also compared to the oil, he said, and the wick is the neshama. That's what he called it. Psil Shemen, it says that the Shemen is a dova shenasa by a mitzvah, the physical things in which we do the mitzvah. We take physical things from Daimim Tzemeach Chai, and through the mamutza of the psilo, the wick, here he's still defining the wick as the neshama, even in the interpretation of the mitzvah. I believe that in Ayin Beis he explained it a bit differently, but I'll discuss that later when we do the comparisons. Let me just look something up before I just want to make sure, just refresh my own memory here. I'm looking at Shinun Beis, Aleph Shinun Beis, 1352. I don't know if he touches the wick, actually. A psili a mitzvah, he says. The rotzna elyon, that's mislabish b'dvarim gashmim. That's the difference. Here he says the psila is the neshama, there at the bottom of page 1351 in Ayin Beis, he said the psil is the mitzvah, that's the Ratzon Elyon, that manifests within the physical things, which is the oil, which in turn creates Teira the of Teira. Okay, but there, the reason he does that is because he's not talking about the Nefesh HaBamis, he's talking there about the mitzvah itself as it affects the world, the physical world. And then there's the mitzvah that has the school of pratis to elevate the animal soul. Okay, we'll talk about this.
The Rebbe also said, like in Ayin Beis, the Alter Rebbe.
The mitzvahs heina machabrim es era teiri ma'odem va'elam. Yeah, because we'll get to that, how Teira manifests through mitzvahs. Okay, but getting back to the point here, so mitzvahs do the same thing. Now, how does a mitzvah have this power? That we say that's the question he asked on page 391. He said, "Yesh lahavim ma'ayin yi'akeach b'ma'isa mitzvahs dvarim gashmish," to bring down this energy, this called the shemen al reishach, which is a high level, as he says, that chai behem, that causes and adds a chayis into the neshama. The mitzvah is adding to the neshama. How could a mitzvah in a gashmistic world do that? So to explain that, he explained what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is not just a mitzvah, meaning it's not just a command. A mitzvah is God's will manifesting itself. What he called Asher Kedushan, the level of Kodesh. He says mitzvahs nikra b'shem Kodesh Asher Kedushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu. They bring the highest level of Kedusha, meaning the highest level of transcendence, as he explains at length, that not just transcendence relative to Mamala Kalam and relative to lower levels like Chochma, but the highest level of transcendence, that's Kodesh Mudvul be'et be'primi yusei and atzmus be'primi yusei v'atzmusei v'av ein sof. That's completely removed, that you can't even talk about it in context of anything else. It's just fundamentally a different reality because it doesn't even relate to existence at all. And that's what mitzvahs are drawing from. That level, what he called Kedushas HaAtzmus. And as
how are they?
And as such, mitzvahs have that power. That's the answer. The power that is so coming from such a high level of kedusha, and that's what comes down. And yesterday we learned a few more details on that. That is called Archin de Golgalta, or Urchin de Golgalta, the paths of the skull, which means a level of makif. Golgalta refers to the keser, the makif. That's the Urchis Havaya, B'chinas Primis HaAtzmus. And that's what we say. The Eibishter puts on tefillin, he wraps himself in tzitzis because it's his mitzvahs. Like he said, mitzvahs mitzvei sov, they're called. Kedushanu b'mitzvei sov. It's his mitzvahs, not just his commands. It's mitzvahs that he himself performs. And he calls that Kedushas HaAtzmus mamish. And that's what we say in the Berichas HaMitzvah, shezeh b'chinas makifim. I think that's the connection to Golgalta, because Golgalta is a makif. It's a makif. The skull is a makif over moichin, over Chochma. So it's the level, the Baruch Berichas HaMitzvahs is makif compared to the very guf yichud elyon, the unification that the mitzvah itself achieves. And that's what a mitzvah does. So a mitzvah is drawing from this highest level beyond all of ishtalshlus. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, l'maylam mikol ishtalshlus, asher kedushanu. Kodesh elyon, the highest level of Kodesh elyon. Like the Zohar says, there are many levels of kedusha, but this is the highest one. So we'll continue from where we left off. I just want to point out, I asked yesterday the question about the parentheses and the brackets. I realized something, my mistake here. The brackets are not from the actual manuscript. The brackets is what the publisher added because he's taking this section, a second manuscript added the section. So the truth is we have to read it as if there is no bracket.
Standing in chill.
Everybody put themselves on silent, please.
It's Yuval. Yuval is not muted.
Okay. So we have to actually read it like there's no bracket, because the bracket is actually taking a second manuscript and adding it. So if you take away the bracket, then the parentheses make sense. So I still stand by what I said, that I think there's two parentheses here. One that actually, I may be incorrect about that. Then comes a second parenthesis that ends by the word Kedushas HaAtzmus. So it's very possible that should be two parentheses. So that accounts for both parentheses. And the bracket should be disregarded because the bracket, again, is from the publisher, not from the writer. Because the bracket is just indicating it's from a different manuscript. And that explains, because I was wondering, how could there be a parenthesis within a bracket and a parenthesis that before the bracket? And the answer is because that's the second manuscript that adds that point. Anyway, just for the record. So with that, let's continue now after the bracket, where he says like this now. Ulakach, middle of page 392. Ulakach mevarchin over lasiyasan, dafke. So Gemara tells us the din is that when do you make the birchas ha-mitzvahs? You don't make it after you do the mitzvah, you do it before. Over lasiyasan, over is like kedem. Over lasiyasan, before you actually do the ma'aseh mitzvah. The Mefarshim there talk about why does it say kedem asiyasan? Why does it say over? The main reason that Ridva and others say because it tells us also that when you make the bracha has to be right before the mitzvah, not a long time before. There can't be a hefsek. That's why you make a blessing and right away you do the mitzvah. So Ovid is telling us that it should be immediately before the mitzvah. Kedem asiyasan could also mean an hour earlier, a half hour earlier, 10 minutes before. So Ovid asiyasan is so he's saying, well, that's why we say the bracha Ovid asiyasan before the asiyah, dafka. Why? Because like he said before, because the first thing you want to do is bring down the Kedusha El Yaina, Asher Kedushan B'Tzveisu V'Tzivanu, onto the mitzvah. Dafka. Kidua, Asher Kedushan B'Tzveisu B'Kedusha El Yaina, Zu HaAtzmus Bereishis. When you say Kedushan B'Tzveisu in the blessing, in the Kedusha El Yaina, that we are being sanctified with his highest level of transcendence, this is the Atzmis and Pnimius. Not like the Kedush, that not like the lower levels, which is more Kedush and Seder Shtashos, even Seviv compared to Mamala Kalaman, like we learned before. So basically, he's explaining that's why you say it first. Now we'll soon understand why he's emphasizing this, because in Torah and the Mittler Rebbe, in a few pages from now, is going to go back to that. He talks there why we put on talis and tefillin before we daven. Same idea before. So we'll get to that a little later. But the point being here is that the bracha, that is Asher Kedeshanu, is preparing us that the mitzvah that we're going to do, the bracha is like the hamshachas hamakif, like he said, b'chinas makifim, that comes prior to the yichud elyon of the actual performance of the mitzvah. To give us that, to be mamshech that kedusha. So that's what the blessing is doing. And then the performance of the mitzvah actualizes it and channels it within our being. So primis v'atzmus v'nikra archen de galgalta. Okay. Now my understanding from the parentheses archen de galgalta, because he's talking this like a makif. Primis HaAtzmus. And now he's going back to saying that the blessing, because I'm just trying to see what was before the parentheses. That mitzvahs bring primis HaAtzmus. Okay, good. And now he's going back to what he began. If you recall on the previous page, when he asked the question, he said, "B'chai b'hem." He said, "Sheyasa Isam ha'adam b'chai b'hem." That the mitzvahs is in the mitzvahs infused in the neshama with more chayis. Sheisesa ve'edel kibbutz neshama chaya chayim. Now we can understand what that means. And now he says, "Shezeu shekosav b'chai b'hem." And that's what it means, that you shall live with these mitzvahs. So the simple interpretation is you shall live by them. These are the mitzvahs God gave you, and you shall follow them. But Chassidus interprets v'chai b'hem that it should add life to you, which means it adds vitality to the neshama. Mechaya hachayim, the atzmis of primis ein sof baruch. So the neshama on its own has divine energy, obviously. But v'chai b'hem, it does a mitzvah. It draws from the source of life, Chaya Chaim, the source of life, the one who gives life. the one who gives life to life, so to speak, from AdHamtz Bereishis of Ein Sof Baruch Hu, which is the Kedusha Elyon Asher Kedushanu that Dafka Mitzvah introduces. For who? And what does this mean? This is Mash'al Dezeh, that through the mitzvahs, Tisala Neshama L'mayla Harba, that through the mitzvahs the neshama elevates far higher, much greater, much higher. Af Misharsha Arishim B'Chochma Datzilus. Even higher, also higher than its first root in Chochma Vatzilus. So even though the neshama's root is much higher, we learned Ola b'Machshava, but Machshava b'Poel. Remember, we learned Behemo and Adam. We learned Adam is Ma of Chochma of Atzilus. Once the neshama comes down into Hishtalshlus, it relates to the level of Chochma of Atzilus. So he's saying, through a mitzvah, even when the neshama comes down to that Chochma of Atzilus, even though it's a high level, it still gets elevated even higher. Like you just said, Galgalta is higher than that, the skull. Or even higher from the Chayah Chayim, from Primus and AdHamtz of Ein Sof that the mitzvah introduces. Now, this Chochma Vatzilus of a neshama is also called Kodesh. Shagam shenikra gam ken Kodesh or Kodesh. Even though the Chochma is also called Kodesh or Kadesh, like we said, or Kodesh, like we said earlier, in the previous page, he said Chochma is also called Ma'ayin Timatzah. It's also called Ayin. But Aval ein leze erech klal legab chinas Kedusha zu the mitzvahs. But the Kedusha of Chochma, where the neshama resides, is not comparable compared to the Kedusha of the mitzvah. This Kedusha of the mitzvah, Shahu, B'Kodesh HaElyon, which is in the supernal highest level of Kodesh. So in other words, the neshama's Kedusha, as it manifests below, is not the same level as comparable to the Kedusha that comes from the mitzvahs. Shemezeh dafki yeh elam haba kiyadua. The Mittler Rebbe adds that what will really create elam haba, we know elam haba is created through our mitzvahs. Not just the neshama coming down to this world. It's not enough. It's Yofer Shach is b'tshuva ma'asim tevim. Elam hazeh mikol chai elam haba. And elam haba in general is a result of our ma'aseh mitzvahs. Dafka from that comes elam haba kiyadua. So, which adds to the point that the mitzvahs add something to the neshama that the neshama on its own would not have. That's what he said so far. Let me just finish and then I'll stop and elaborate and we'll stop for questions. Another parenthesis here. U'kamoy kain. So now you could ask the question, what about the great neshamas like Moshe Rabbeinu? So he says, U'kamoy kain gam nishmas Moshe olav hashalom. So too, also the soul of Moshe, shu b'pnimis abba datzilus, shenikra ma, which comes from the pnimius of Chochma Vatzilus of Abba, which is called Ma, v'zeo ma shmoi. That's why he said ma shmoi. Other places he brings v'nochnu ma. So Moshe is also the letters, Mem Shin Hey has the letters Mach, so this explains. So Moshe was utter bittel of Chochma, not just Chochma, pnimius Abba. Makol mokim, even in a neshama like Moshe, al yedei ha-mitzvos she'asad, through the mitzvahs that Moshe did, Nisala nishmase b'kedush ilah hanal. Moshe's soul also was elevated to the level of the supernal Kodesh, the higher level of Kodesh that we're talking about, Kedushas HaAtzmus. Shalamayla hadba mizeh. That's a lot higher even than Pnimius Abba, the Kedusha of Pnimius Abba Ma, Shema. V'chein ba'Avram. The same thing with Avram. Though Avram had a very great neshama, but then it says, Shamar, and Avram, Asher Shama Bekeli Vayishmer. Hashem says, the person who listened to my voice and he Yishmer, and he fulfilled the mitzvahs. Vayishmer mitzvesai. So he too, what do the mitzvahs add to a neshama like that? This hamshacha of Kodesh Elyon from the highest level of Kedusha. So there is Kedusha in Chochma Vatzilus, in Pnimius Abba as well. There's Kedusha in the neshama of Moshe and these levels, but the Kedusha that add the mitzvahs add is a whole other level. And the same thing with each neshama, these great neshamas. He mentions Moshe and Avram, but he's saying the same with every neshama befrat, specifically the same idea. No matter how high the neshama is, each one in their particular way, through mitzvahs, it elevates them to a higher dimension. And that's why mitzvahs are necessary for all of us. No matter how high the neshama is, that's what a mitzvah does. Now, of course, we need explanations. So what does a neshama have without the mitzvah? And what about the neshama above? This is a neshama in Atzilus. So the obvious answer is because we're talking about the neshama below. A neshama in Olah b'machshava, before the tzimtzum, that's rooted, like he said, Shema Yisrael on the highest levels, there's no mitzvahs. There the neshama has not come down below. We're talking about the neshama below. If you remember, we learned in Ayin Beis, he spoke about the two different levels. There's the neshama that's higher than Torah and mitzvahs, and there's the Torah and mitzvahs are higher than the neshama. So he said the neshama in its root, the way it's above, is higher than everything. But when it comes down below, it needs Torah and mitzvahs to reveal, like we said, the eye needs an external light, siyua, because it cannot see in the dark. So neshama, as it comes down below, shcheirani, is darkened. So though the neshama has got tremendous divine energy, but it has to be generated, it has to be stimulated. And that's through Torah and mitzvahs. Just to jump ahead to answer that question, the obvious question here. So we're talking about the neshama using mitzvahs. Like we said, the whole idea that he spoke about in Ayin Beis, we're going to get to when we finish this whole subject, that there's mamata l'mayla, the neshama, through davening, l'mayla lamata through Torah. And mitzvahs, we said, something in between. It's hamshachah mamayla lamata because it's a mitzvah from Hashem, but it's not quite the mamayla lamata of Torah, which we're going to soon learn is Torah Eir, even higher than Ner mitzvah. But bottom line is, what Ner mitzvah does, it illuminates like a Ner and elevates the neshama even to a higher level than the neshama is on its own. That's what he said here with the end of this paragraph. Again, this topic is not over. He's going to still be speaking about it for a while. So there may be things that need still to be developed. Yeah. So I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
So that means that the mitzvahs in this high darge, that the HaAtzmus Mamesh, Kedushas HaAtzmus Mamesh, is lower than the neshama.
What's lower than?
Once again, pay attention to the Smith family party of four: Arthur Smith, Brody Smith, Kelly.
What's lower than the neshama?
I think he was saying the mitzvahs are lower than the neshama, but he wasn't.
It's the exact opposite.
You spoke
Mitzvahs
to
are
it.
higher than the neshama.
I know you spoke to it right before he asked this question, that in its origin the neshama is higher than mitzvahs, but as the neshama comes down to the goof, it's lower. I don't know why he was asking, because you actually answered that before he asked.
Maybe the question was before I said that. Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I understand that the mitzvah is relevant to neshama and below, not above. But here's my question: Neshama's above is part of Hashem, chelek mamash, right? So we just discussed that Hashem also does mitzvot. So if you're talking about the etzem of Hashem, Hashem Himself doing mitzvot, then by definition, if we're part of Him, even at the highest level, mitzvot has to also be part of us as well.
So okay, fine with that.
Okay, so it's not
That's
just specific to the neshama coming down. If we still have it,
but that just makes the case even stronger. Why we need to do mitzvahs, because mitzvahs add something to the neshama that it doesn't have on its own.
Correct.
The fact that Hashem does mitzvahs for him is proof that the mitzvahs come from the highest levels. Mitzvah say it's God's mitzvahs, meaning it's connected to Ein Kodesh Kavaya, the highest level of godliness, of Kedusha. That's the point that he made. He said, why is it called Shmaniach Tefillin? Because it's coming from that highest level. Mitzvah Sov Mamish, Kedushas HaAtzmus. So the mitzvahs of Hashem is, like I said, is the actual divine tools, if you wish, or divine channels, or divine connections. Mitzvah from the word connections, that a neshama is given to be able to reach the highest levels of Kedusha. That we're not getting now what the neshama itself also has high levels. And the mitzvahs are going to help the neshama get back to its place. That's in many ways the neshama is the one that actually also can contribute something to the mitzvahs. But right now he's talking about what mitzvahs do for the neshama. As I said, it's a big picture here. It's not just one detail here. At the end of the day, a mitzvah doesn't do itself. Who does the mitzvah? It's a neshama in a body that performs the mitzvah. Okay. As I said, the topic is not over. Didn't finish at all. So we're just going through, step by step. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Now, I did want to mention, even though this is not what we're learning right now, I did want to mention that I mentioned yesterday in regard to Rab Shleima's question about AdHamtz, I said I would give you the source for Teda Shalom. So in Teda Shalom, it's page 147, where the Rebbe Rashab speaks about, when we speak about AdHamtz, what is it referring to? So I just wanted to give you that source. I don't know if Rab Shleima is still on the call here, on the class, but regardless, if you have a Teda Shalom, Yitzchak, you can pose that page if people
What
want to
page
see.
did you say? 197?
147.
Oh. I'm looking for it now, so I'll bleed at it. I'll post it.
Yeah. If somebody wants to see it, it's just part of it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's continue. Now, however,
I'm sorry I got interrupted. I am in the airport. So the mitzvahs are the psila?
what we learn now is that mitzvahs elevate a neshama higher than its own level because the neshama is rooted in a Chochma, and the Kodesh Elyon of a mitzvah is all the way in Pnimius HaAtzmus.
Okay, and this is the psila? You know, the shaman...
He's not talking about the psila here. Now he's talking about mitzvahs b'chlal. The psila is because the mitzvahs come down into Gashmias.
Okay. So you're not talking about if it's a neshama or if it's a psila?
No, one second. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam is one pasuk. Ner Mitzvah V'Teireh is another pasuk. What are you asking right now?
My question is, when we're talking about the psila, this is talking
the
about
in
the
which
mitzvahs or the
in Ner
neshama?
Hashem Nishmas Adam or Ner Mitzvah V'Teireh? Which pasuk are you talking?
Ner
Which Ner?
mitzvah. Ner mitzvah.
So on top of page 391, the Rebbe Rashab said, the Mittler Rebbe said like this, that there, Amamutza de Psili Nishmas Adam canal. He doesn't compare the mitzvah to psila. He compares the neshama to the psila, and the mitzvah is the shemen. The mitzvah is it says like this: "It is Hashem u'davar shenasa b'yam mitzvah shelekeach midvarim gashmim," and through the mamutza psila of the neshama adam had Hashem and kola ba'ir. So a mitzvah takes basically the oil, the physical objects of this world, and the neshama doing the mitzvah turns it into a divine light. That's what he said on top of 391. In Ayin Beis, he explained it also another way. He explained psila as being the mitzvah that manifests inside physical objects. But right here, he's talking about it this way. But right now, he's not talking about psila. Now, what we learned here was more about what a mitzvah does to a neshama. Okay. I don't know if you were on, Rab Shleima, but I just told you, so he's going to post the Teda Shalom I mentioned yesterday, page 147. We talked about what AdHamtz is. Yeah. Okay. So let's continue now inside. So he says like this. Now, however, Hinimavur Lamaila was explained earlier that neshama lo yarda l'saken atzma. I gave the pages about that earlier as well. The neshama did not come down below to repair itself. He said that several times, 3 times I recall earlier. Yeah. Just 1 second.
Are you sure that you gave us that page 147? Because I have a different segment of pages that we learned.
Page 1, that's a different Torah Shalom. It's not the same Torah Shalom. What I'm referring to is 147 about
The
Atzmus.
same, the
It's
same
a different
book or
Torah Shalom. It's not the Torah Shalom we learned. It's a different one.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just see something. Hold on a second. Yeah. So on 385 and on 363, and I think one more time. Yeah, the Rebbe Rashab, the Mittler Rebbe said that Neshama lo yarda l'saken atzmas. So it says in Tanya, the Neshama did not come down for its own tikkun. Ki ein sarach tikkun liyesem me'elam tikkun. Because the Neshama comes from the world of tikkun. It doesn't need repair. It doesn't need refinement. Neshama is a divine entity from the world of tikkun. So why does it come down? We learned in order to refine the animal soul. But nevertheless, once it does come down, that doesn't mean it doesn't get elevated. Because the neshama is not just coming down and not benefiting from the process. It's just the neshama would not come down if it was only for its own needs. So the neshama comes down to transform the world and the animal soul. The im kozeh nisakno v'nisala neshama idei ma'isa mitzvos mitamanal. But nevertheless, once it does come down, so the sakna, the neshama gets a, well, I wouldn't use the word repair here. I would use the word beautification. Tikkun also comes from word tikkunim, like ornament. It gets beautified and elevated through Maisa mitzvahs mitamanal, for the reason above. Because the mitzvahs bring that into the neshama. So this is something that we discussed a number of times, that generally speaking, there are two, we talk about the neshama doesn't come down for itself, it comes to transform the animal soul and the world. But then sometimes it says the neshama comes down, you need the tzedek aliyah, to bring out its deeper strength that it would not have above. Above, the soul is not pressured and is not challenged. All the examples that he gives, the king sending his son away from his palace, the many examples that come to teach us that neshama, its deepest strengths come out dafka in this world. So you see that the Rebbe speaks about it in a sikh in Chelik Chof and Pasha Lech Lecha, I believe, Noach, I think, Noach. Pasha Noach, Tovshin Mem Lamed Ches. There's two different aspects. But bottom line, what he's saying here is that even though the neshama came from Elam HaTikun, but once it comes down and does its work, it does through Maisa Mitzvahs, it does get elevated higher than Tikun, to the levels that the Mitzvahs can elevate it to. So we're now on top of page 393. The Oid, and additionally, another point the Mittler Rebbe adds, Betam shenoz tchilosim b'seifan, due to the reason, the cause that says that the beginning is wedged in the end, dafke. Dafke in the end, you find the beginning wedged in the end. Shezel b'chinas sur mera, the mitzvahs b'dvarim gashmim, so dafke seifan. What's the seifan? We come down to this world where mitzvahs, the mitzvahs of avoiding things that are prohibited, surmarat, the evil, stay away from evil. The mitzvahs bedvarim gashmim, the klippas nega dafke. You have no surmarat ilamayla in the higher worlds. It's only in the lowest worlds where you have a concept of ra and says stay away from, do not steal, do not murder, do not do other things. So it's surmara, dafke bedvarim gashmim, and physical things of klippas nega. So he's beginning with surmara because I guess that emphasizes the ra. But also the positive mitzvahs are also in klippas nega. Before you do the mitzvah, the object is klippas nega, whether it's wool or parchment or a esrig and so on. Before the mitzvah, it's klippas nega. Shebezem melubish mekedesh she'elyon hanal, and dafke there is melubish. Dafka in the lowest, no, it's Chilosim B'Seifa. In the lowest is wedged the beginning from the highest levels of Kodesh Elyon Hanal. U'pnimis HaTainag HaPoshet. HaAtzmus dafke. Now he's adding that it's also Tainag HaPoshet. It's coming from the inner seamless or seamless and completely what we say, Pnimis HaTainag HaPoshet. this completely seamless and pure pleasure. HaAtzmus dafke. Pnimius hataynig haposhet HaAtzmus dafke. Because when you do a mitzvah, you're fulfilling God. Nachas ruach shamarti v'naseh tzeni. It's creating it's drawing down from the deepest level of tainug from the highest levels. So he didn't say that expression before tainug. He just spoke about Kodesh Elyon. He spoke about Rotzen. But now he's adding pnimius hataynig haposhet HaAtzmus dafke. So in other words, what is the v'oid coming to add? The oid matam. What he's adding now is this point. Till now, he's saying that a mitzvah is rooted all the way in the highest levels in Kedushas HaAtzmus. Now he's saying, actually, is because the fact that it comes down so low is because it's the beginning is wedged there. Kavana el Yena from the highest level is dafka to come down. It's not just a mitzvah happens to come from the highest levels. It's precisely because the highest is wedged in the lowest. So dafka mitzvah comes in this gashmizdika world, and there, only in this world can you achieve a mitzvah, like he's saying here, which draws from the Kodesh Elyon and from previous tainug haposhet HaAtzmus dafka. Kamesha kosav the chol tichla shu tainug re'isi kates. So the expression is the chol tichla re'isi kates. To every beginning there's an end, or to every entity there's an end. So he's teaching here tichla from the word like vayechulu. So yechulu could also mean from the word tainug, from pleasure. The isi kates. So every type of pleasure, I see a limit, is all finite. I see a defined parameter, limit. Remember he said because the beginning of the pasuk is isi kates. To everything that exists, I see an end. But it's your mitzvahs that I see totally expansive, what he called before bleak vul. He mentioned it before on the previous page. He called the chol tichel yisik kates bleak vul mamish, he said. Or was it 2 pages back? I'm trying to find where it is. No, I think it was here, bleak vul, on page, the previous page. 1 second. Just give me a second. Come on, I don't find it. Oh, yeah, right here. Okay. On the previous page, page 392, he mentioned the second half of the pasuk, and now he's going back to the first half. Yeah. Before the parentheses. So he's saying, so everything has a limit, except the tainug of mitzvahs. The einig ha'atzmi, that's there in mitzvah secha, mamish, is the chava ma'ed, is very expansive. V'dai l'mev. So, continuing on this idea, so it's dafke as it comes down below, that's wedged the beginning, this highest level of Kodesh Elyon and Tainug. The reason that it's able to generate and draw from that highest level is because it comes from the lowest level. You nisbared it from the darkness of the translucent, or from the radiant klipa as it comes down below. So it's dafke when you do a mitzvah below, in the gashmistic of this world, in klipas nega, and you do surmada. He doesn't say asete, but it means all mitzvahs. That draws from the highest levels. That that there should be this eir kedusha zu in the physical mitzvah shebezfil zeh, and this is the reason for which the purpose yarden nashama levara berunim the klipas nega. So he's saying 2 points. That's the additional point. So for that, the neshama came down, like we said, not for its own purpose, but to be mevada the berurim of Klippas Nega in this world. And that's why it draws down this, and that's why it reaches that highest level and brings it into the neshama as well. So both points. Number one, the neshama doesn't need this tikkun on its own, but once it comes down, it gets it, this elevation. And two, he's now emphasizing that the neshama comes down in order to repair this world. And when in the process of going down to the lowest, it draws from the highest levels of Kodesh Elyon and Tainug Poshet Atzmi. And these are the good deeds that we do on a daily basis, every day. This is the good deeds that he does every day. Shamashlim nafshe, that he completes his soul, meaning to draw these highest levels. Levushim makifim, and he creates garments and makifim, transcendent energies, me'irim lenishmosei, that radiate and illuminate in his soul, ma'od, makiv me'irim lenishmosei ma'od, like Rechav Mitzvah ma'od, in a very increased way, but teisrus meruba al ikar shorsha l'mayla canal, with an abundance, an additional level of energy, more than its root, than the energy in its root, in its very root. Ikar shosha, we say meruba ala ikar. So in other words, the dividends that he gains here is greater than the keren, than the principle of the neshama as it was in Atzilus on its own. Like the Zohar says on the pasuk of Avram Zokin Bo Bayomim. And the question, of course, is once it says Avram age, what's the Bo Bayomim? So the Zohar says what he came into his days, Bayomim Be'inun Levushin. That he came with all these days, every day brought the garment of that day. Every day has a birur of its own. So Avram didn't just age and become older, but every day was filled. He was mevar bo bayomim. He came with every full, complete days. Every day was actualized and realized its potential power, because every day brings the levushim, like he explains in Zohar, Chassidus explains, every day has a levush. That's why you can't do a mitzvah for 2 days. For example, a mitzvah like davening shachris today, you can't daven shachris tomorrow if you missed today. So the question is, why not? Because the mitzvah is not just the shachris, the mitzvah is also the time of the day. And every day has its own birur. Today's birur is for today, not for yesterday. And tomorrow's another birur. So it says that Avram came with all these days. So in other words, in this physical world, doing the mitzvahs each day, it was mamshich into the neshama, all the shleim. A shleim was that it did not have on its own. So as much as a neshama is a high elevated level in tikkun, all the way Chochma of Atzilus, this it does not have. When it comes down below, the neshama gains something through mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs draw down into the neshama and empower the neshama with a higher energy that comes from Kodesh Elyon, all the way from Pnimius and HaAtzmus, Tainug, and the Kodesh Elyon that he's been talking about till here. V'zeu, v'holach lefanecha tzidkecha, and this is what it means, v'holach lefanecha tzidkecha, that your tzedek, your tzedakah, walks before you, leads, v'chein v'ani b'tzedek echze panecha, with my tzedek, ani, with my tzedek, with my kindness, my charity, my kindness, my generosity, echze panecha, I grasp his panim, meaning b'tzedakah the mitzvahs ma'ases dafke, the dafke, all this halach lefanecha tzidkecha, what's lefanecha? Pnimius. He's teaching everything that mitzvahs dafke, and tzedakah here is a word for all mitzvahs. It reaches pnimius, lefanecha and echze panecha. B'tzedakah the mitzvahs ma'ases dafke. This is dafke with the tzedakah, the kindness that's done through actual physical mitzvahs, actionable mitzvahs. V'chein tzedakah tereimim goy. And also we say tzedakah tereimim goy, that tzedakah elevates and exalts goy, the nation. Moshe is bar, you may recall in Torah Ed, he discussed that, and we're going to learn that as well more. Like he says, Moshe is bar, shall be explained. So what we have now is an addition here. He explained here 2 key points. One is that the neshama, even though it doesn't come down for this purpose, because it's already it already has its tikkun, but it does get elevated. And number 2, the neshama does come down to be mavada the world, and that in turn increases in the neshama, all these levels that the neshama would not have on its own. Because the beginning is wedged in the end, and that's what mitzvahs accomplish here. I think the difference between the va'id and what he said before is what he said before is neshama comes down and already benefits from it. Here is more elaborate, that the neshama actually, through doing mitzvahs, what it actually does into the neshama. So it's not just elevating it, it explains the process of the neshama engaging with this world, with the battles in this world, and turning, and from the lowest leads us back to the highest levels of Kodesh Elyon. So before the va'id, it's like he first explains that even when we talk about the neshama on its own, not for the purpose of being mavada berudim, also gets elevated. And then the neshama comes down to mavada berudim, and that really explains why it gets elevated, because dafki berudim lamata reach the highest levels in atzmus.
So the elevation means that she's getting stronger while she's down here, that she's having more kayach to influence the nefesh habamis. But she's not being elevated legabe shorsho horishon. It cannot be higher.
I don't know.
than
He didn't discuss that yet. Not so simple. We'll get there. He didn't discuss that yet. You have to ultimately say it affects it even in the Shosha Rishon. But I don't want to go there right now because I want to finish as he goes along with this. Let's see how he explains it. It's a big topic in Samach Vav and Ayin Beis, actually, what we're addressing here. Meanwhile, he's saying that the neshama is elevated. Not getting into which levels exactly, he didn't say where or what.
I understand what you're saying, but like you said, there's a need for explanation. How could it be higher than Shosh Rishon?
But that's why we didn't finish the mimer yet. That's why I say patient. Let's see how he explains it, and then we'll discuss that. I know it's I brought it up before. In Ayin Beis, he spoke about the neshama as it comes down below and the neshama as it's above. You can't say that it doesn't have an effect on the neshama above, because then, so what's the purpose? It was only for the neshama below that it's doing it. A mitzvah is not necessary for the neshama above in its very root. It's hard to say that. That's why I'm hesitating saying that.
Only if he's saying that the neshama is a nivro. I know we spoke about it.
But it goes deeper than
Failure.
that. It goes deeper than that. Is the neshama coming down below? Does it do anything for the neshama in Sharshei Adishon? Forget about mitzvahs and Teda right now. The fact that the neshama comes down below in this world to make a dida b'taktenim, does it do anything for the neshama as in its Sharshei Adishon? Of course it does. You have to say it does. That's why neshama comes down. It's not just for the birur of the nefesh habamis. They make a dida b'taktenim, something happens, even the highest level of the neshama.
Maybe you have to tie it with the Yisaveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the Shosh Rishon. This is part of the HaAtzmus.
Anyway, bottom line is, I'm saying to you briefly that at all levels of neshama will get an aliyah. The explanation, I would wait till we learn the whole thing, because I don't want to jump. There's a big picture that's developing here that you have to connect to Ayin Beis. It's a whole discussion. I don't want to go there right now because it's not where we are. We're not up to that yet. But we will discuss it. That I can assure you. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? No questions? Okay. So we finished the paragraph on page 393. And I'll stop here.
I did post the page 147 of the Torah Shalom on the WhatsApp group. Rabbi Typed on anyone else that's interested.
Okay.